Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody that is hopefully for somebody. I am the host of this show, Kyle Naranya. This week's episode will feature two reviews of a wild variety. One is the musical remake of Mean Girls, the film that now is celebrating its 20th anniversary. That is absolutely mind-blowing. The second is part one of a three-part conclusion to what has been dubbed the Tomorrowverse, with Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 1. Both films will have spoilers and non-spoiler sections. Those timecodes will be listed in the description if you have not yet had a chance to see either of these films. First off, I'm going to review Mean Girls, so let's get into the non-spoiler review of that film.
You could be really hot if you change, everything.
All right, I officially feel old as now we are remaking films from my childhood for the next generation. It's an interesting paradigm to see Tina Fey returning to the screenplay while having new directors and obviously a new, much younger cast for this remake, which, again, similar to my review of Color Purple, which was a film that was then adapted into a Broadway musical and then eventually remade into a musical adaptation of the Broadway musical film. And interestingly enough, it's something I mentioned in the Color of Purple review, which is, if you were not in the know, you would have absolutely no idea that this film is now a musical, because the trailers, for the most part, pretty much hide that from you, outside of a couple of out-of-context scenes of dancing that are in the marketing material. And it's interesting that they, at least the studio behind this, Paramount, decided to try to trick people into theaters. Allegedly, I don't even know how to describe it. The marketing data alleges that, I just said that twice, apologize, it's been a long weekend, that a lot of film goers or general audiences don't actually like musicals, so you have to trick them into that, which is unfortunate because I don't think it allows to actually show off the purpose of this remake. It's been 20 years, and I can understand wanting to remake a film that had a lot of resonance for a previous generation and wanting to adapt it for the Gen Z or Gen Z generation, Zoomers as I like to call them. So it's an interesting task at hand. Having Tina Fey return to the screenplay is particularly interesting to me when we get into further spoilers as to what she decided to keep, what she decided to change, and ultimately what doesn't really fit in with this generation. And so the first thing I want to talk about is the cast. I'm going to be completely honest, I had really mixed reaction to this film in general. Not that I felt it had to stay true to the original. Well, of course, I really like the original, and in terms of pop culture, it's certainly been a mainstay. Fetch is never going to happen. We wear Wednesdays on Pink. Too gay to function for Damien in the Burn Book. There's a lot of things from the Burn Book that are changed to be much more politically friendly now, as there are a substantial amount of insults and things that happened in the original that you could absolutely not get away with now. But from the top, oh no, Angourie, I'm guessing, apologize for the mispronunciation, Angourie Rice, who you would know as Betty Brant from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, plays Katie Heron in this version, as well as Renee Rapp as Regina George. Oh no, how do you say this? It says Chloe as her first name, but then also something else, which I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce. The actress who played Moana as Janice, Jaquil Spivey as Damien. Literally everybody in this film, I think, was cast really well. Now, ultimately, I think they're doing the best they can with the actual script. I'm not going to get into specifics because those would be categorized as spoilers, at least in my opinion. But I think Tina Fey ultimately really wanted to stick to the bare bones, and more specific details, that doesn't make any sense. I apologize. But the framework of the movie is there, but ultimately, I found the movie to be really interesting in where I don't think the overall direction and camera cinematography works well at all particularly for the musical scenes where everybody is singing. I don't know if this was just a theater problem when I went to go see the film, but the first couple of songs, the sound mix wasn't very good, and I really didn't know what they were saying. So it's hard if you don't understand the lyrics to really get inside the characters' heads, which is especially interesting given the fact that the first Mean Girls had some first person elements to it. We do get to hear inside Katie's head when it was played by Lindsay Lohan. So her frame of reference, as well as that own character's emotions and self monologue, is expressed to the audience, which is not something you typically get in films in general. So oh my goodness, I apologize. It is much easier for the audience to be on board with her actions and understanding the choices and methodology behind them. In a musical, that should be turned up to the nth degree, given how you break into song because you are unable to say what you want to say, and therefore there's only one other way to express that being in music. And as a whole, I don't think the music actually serves that function, which is especially disappointing. There are a substantial amount of whip pans in this movie, and I found a lot of the camera work to be very unnerving and really hard to focus on, particularly when following the characters around during the choreography. There were so many whip pans that at times I found what was supposed to be in focus out of focus, and then the coherence of the shots in general just were blurry, and there were a substantial amount of head-on shots of the cast where we are almost angled up their nose, which I found really interesting, and it certainly was a choice. As I said already, I think the cast does a really good job, but from a script level, what I found really frustrating was I don't think it's either an extreme representation of Gen Z or a insulting perspective on this generation. I don't think you would necessarily want to do that, but being a film from the early 2000s, I don't think it really represents either generation particularly well in this musical version. It seems to be a weird hybrid, and the elements that they do choose to use to bring in social media felt really derivative of what was more recently seen in the Dear Evan Hansen adaptation, where we do get to see Snapchat or Instagram used to some degree. And I think with the significant explosion of these apps, particularly from the pandemic onward, and something like TikTok winding up to be so popular that at one point it was the helmet sponsor for the Toronto Maple Leafs in the NHL, that the level of conversation that these characters have, I think, attempts to be enlightened while at the same time maybe less informed. And I don't think the actual dialogue does the characters any good, that the actors chosen for these roles do the best with what they can. And it being this weird Franken generation, I don't think it offers enough to feel new and unique. And that ultimately is the biggest failure of this remake, which is it is a Broadway musical adaptation to the screen, but it fails to enhance the film with visuals that you would only get from something like a film musical, not a theatrical one, a theater-based musical on the stage, where we really don't get to explore interesting songs. As I mentioned, I don't think the lyrics in the songs add anything that you wouldn't necessarily get from the dialogue that the characters are experiencing as a whole, that we hear out loud, and that it is a note-for-note remake, which is, I know for a lot of people, good because you're following a lot of what you like about the original, but what they choose to remove and take out, I think makes the world feel smaller, particularly with certain characters who are present or not at all in the film. It's unfortunate because I actually was quite looking forward to this, it being an opportunity to retell this story for a new generation with a new perspective on obviously society, high school in general, but even the presentation of that feels much more aligned with things we've seen earlier, even as far back as 12 years ago with something like 21 Jump Street, which managed to show, I think, a much more realistic perspective while obviously being comedic example of high school, whether that be in California or where I actually can't even remember where she goes to school, but that is neither here nor there. And so I think ultimately the movie is fine. It may work for the next generation, but it being something I was hoping to see something new from failed to meet any of the aspects I was looking forward to, which was a much more theatrical, cinematic version of this story, given how there should have been songs and dance, as well as a new perspective given from a younger generation. And I just felt that it scratches the surface while not ultimately not offering anything new that makes it worth watching over the original. If I were to suggest watching any of these, I would say watch the original, obviously knowing that some of those jokes are dated and certainly are much more offensive now, but that this film doesn't offer anything that surpasses or even manages to meet the level of success from the originals, which is unfortunate. So I can explain some of that more so in spoilers. So I'm going to do that. This wraps up my non-spoiler section of the review of Mean Girls 2024.
Why are you dressed so scary?
It's Halloween.
Katie, if you don't dress slutty, that is slut-shaming us.
All right, the first thing I wanted to mention is that an interesting change from the original is that Katie's dad is not present at all in the film. He doesn't, well, at some point he would have existed given how Katie exists. But I looked this up prior to jumping into spoilers, which is that this film is in fact longer than the original, which for me particularly is an example of the fact that with it being a musical, obviously I understand that you're going to have these dance sequences and musical numbers that are going to pad out the runtime. Not to say that's necessarily a bad thing, but ultimately that they fail to do the job of what purpose they should serve in the musical, which is enhancing and exploring the character depth to a level we can't unless we are actually inside their heads, as I said in the non-spoiler section. And Katie not having a dad is an example to me where that's okay to make a change. It presents an opportunity to show a single mother raising a kid in an American high school that she would probably have more difficulty with being a single parent. You've got to film multiple roles in that child's life, but you get Jenna Fisher and she barely has anything to say. There's a scene in the trailer where she talks about her daughter learning things she doesn't know, but it doesn't come up that she's struggling as a single parent, or I think there are less, I'd have to look this up, but I have a safe feeling that there are less scenes with Katie's mom than there are with either of her parents in the original. So to me, it was a subtraction by subtraction, where having it be just a single mom could have been an interesting way to examine the relationships in the story, but ultimately it doesn't do anything new other than just subtracting the dad. And that's not to say that, oh, the dad has to be in it to make it better. No, I actually think it could have been much more interesting given the fact that they're both new to what's going on, but it doesn't do that either. Another thing is that we have a lot less of the supporting cast, which I think really does help flesh out the world. Obviously, you're not going to have the relationship between the sex ed / gym coach you would have had in the original, because obviously that is a criminal act that was happening in the first film and not something to laugh at. But another character who is completely almost not in the film at all is Regina's ex-boyfriend. And I think having a smaller cast really hurts the film and really doesn't get to see the emphasis of what everyone's choices and how they're negatively affecting each other with talking behind people's backs or going out of their way to ruin each other's lives. And even with the more interactions we have with the core cast, being Katie, Regina, Janice, Damien, Karen, Gretchen, Aaron, and even Miss Norbury, it baffles me that is the case. I tweeted this out earlier, which was that this film was released in January, and this, if you're not a diehard film fanatic or really entrenched in this stuff, I don't know if you'd be aware of the fact that typically this is where movies go to die, that the studios know that they are not likely going to do very well. And because of that, they dump them in January and February. And I think if this film boded well, potentially with test screenings or even the studio's own projections, that this could have been a really great lead-in into the summer. But it's something that ultimately, as I said, I don't think the movie's very good, and I'm really disappointed by that because, as I said in the non-spoilers, and I know I'm banging this drum and you're saying, Kyle, you're old, this isn't for you, and I'd love nothing more than that for this not to be for me, for a lot of this to be an interesting exploration of what things are like in high school now from this next generation. It's been quite a while since I was in high school, but in terms of just getting to see these characters' growth, the film doesn't even offer an opportunity to analyze that, where we do get to see everybody at the spring dance at the very end, and there's a lot more breaking the fourth wall in this case, that being an element that I think does work, given the fact that people are on their phones with front-facing cameras, which was not something you could have done in 2004. But the fact that the film just concludes at the dance, we don't actually get to see the positive aftermath of the burn book being released and having those conversations about what people said and how people have been treated, and realizing that we've all done things to negatively impact others' lives, and we should be focusing on impacting ours in a positive way and not to be so cliquey. We don't really get to see that. We get to see Katie give the pieces of the crown, and she kisses Aaron, but that's it. The conclusion, I think, even fails to do the same as the original, but doesn't offer anything new in replace of that. So that's why I find this movie to be really disappointing, is anything in addition ultimately is a subtraction to the quality of the movie, not in, well, it's not like the original. If they had come up with a better idea or something more modern to replace a lot of those ideas, I think it would have been a substantially better film. Again, I think this comes down to direction. I give a lot of credit to the directors, who I believe this is their first feature film, but there are a lot of attempts to make this theatrical and ultimately winds up being an incoherent thing to watch at times. But the script potentially should have been written by somebody else, with the story being what we know from the original. And I'm just disappointed that a film I was quite looking forward to ultimately left me disappointed. So if you want to see another version of this, you can check it out, but ultimately I don't think it's one I'm going to be recommending. That will do it for my Mean Girls spoiler review. Next, I'm going to be moving into non-spoilers for Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 1.
Most of you are aware that you live in a reality parallel to many versions of your universe.
So this is an interesting film. Little history lesson for those who may or may not know. There have been several versions of films released by DC that are more PG-13, that are intended for a more mature audience. And there was a prior universe to this, referred to as the Decamu, which was a shared universe of 20 films that ended with Justice League Dark Apocalypse War in May of 2020, which is, it's crazy to me that that's the case. And starting in August of 2020, we were given a rebooted universe led by producer Butch Lukic and Jim Krieg, leading with Superman of Tomorrow, and going through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 films. Batman Long Halloween was 2 parts, but I guess they're considering it 1. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then ending in 7, 8, 9, and 10. And it's a really interesting thing for me to be reviewing this when I am, as Justice League Infinite Earths is probably one of the most famous storylines in Justice League, well, it is, but in DC Comics history, period, where it was a story written by Mark Wolfman and illustrated by George Perez that was the culmination of the multiverse. I know a lot of people are sick of that word at this point, that had gotten too big for listeners, too complicated for new readers. I said listeners, but new readers and old readers, and ultimately scaled everything back to a much more coherent universe so that way you could understand, and it was easier for newer readers to get a grasp on what the rules were and who was important, who wasn't, and what the history was for all the different characters. If you were a fan of the Arrowverse, this was famously done near the end of the show's run, where we saw the death of Oliver Queen and what was supposed to be the death of Barry Allen, but ultimately was, spoilers, the death of a different Flash. And so this event is very popular. I know a lot of people are sick of it. Ironically, this finished airing in 2020, which was, I think, quite successful given how this was made on a TV show budget. But we are getting the new version of Crisis on Infinite Earths, which we know will be approximately 4.5 hours in length, given how each part is probably about to be an hour and a half. I'm going to be completely honest. I had a complete up and down reaction to this film. I have not been necessarily a huge fan of this universe. I think the overall art style is really cool and compelling, and they chose to do some really cool stories, particularly Justice Society World War II. I thought was an amazing, fun way to analyze the history of the Tomorrowverse universe, and spoilers, ultimately it being on Earth 2, giving us Jay Garrick and classic versions of the Justice Society characters. Matt Bomer, in particular, as the Flash, I think is a really phenomenal casting. I think about 10 years ago, he would have been an absolutely amazing Nightwing. Just going to put that on the record. But then as a whole, Batman Long Halloween, I think, was a good adaptation. And this is by no means that film's fault, but a lot of the framework of that story has been adapted into other media, maybe more successfully, something like The Dark Knight, or even elements of the more recent The Batman, which I, of course, reviewed with Brian Maneely of Jump on the Batwagon. And then following that with Green Lantern, Beware My Power, Legion of Superheroes and Justice League War World. So I wasn't really excited. Also because a film like this, where you are encapsulating all of the multiverse, and for a trailer where everything in it was in the same art style we had seen before, that really didn't excite me. But I was thoroughly surprised with what ultimately is the focus of the film, which I don't think I can actually say in non-spoilers. Apologies for that. But in general, I think it is actually a really well executed part one of this story. I would say it is complete in what the focus is of this part of the story. It certainly takes a while to lay the groundwork for what we are going to be seeing in parts 2 and 3. It certainly addresses some of my issues I've had with the Tomorrow universe, or the Tomorrowverse in general, which I was really happy about. As I stated, wasn't really looking forward to this. And Crisis on Infinite Earths is just the most popular version of the DC multiverse, even being condensed into Justice League Crisis on Two Earths, which was a film in the DC original animated movie line years and years ago. And so I've said that multiple times. I apologize. I'm recording this late on Sunday night, but I still wanted to get an episode out on time. That's my goal of 2024, get episodes out on time. I think the art style is really great, but it's been an ongoing trend in American animation over the last probably 10 years at this point now, where the budgets are substantially less, and you can really see that in what would typically be fully animated motions of characters, whether that was walking cycles or action sequences, and you can kind of see where corners are cut at times, which is especially disappointing given the high detail character models. It'd be really cool to see how they move in the universe. One thing I'm going to be critical of is we don't actually get to see a massive amount of the universe. We get to see a lot of people standing around, but as I said, I'm going to get more into this in spoilers. In general, as the start of a conclusion, I was quite happy by the end, and I am much more looking forward to part 2 than I would have been prior to watching this. My assumption would have been that I wouldn't have enjoyed this, given my minimal investment in the Tomorrowverse. So I know this is a very vague review, and I apologize for that. I think ultimately the direction works. I think Jeff Wamester, who's directed multiple of these films, did a good job with this. He's directed the last 4 at this point. It was certainly an improvement over Justice League War World, which I know I didn't review, which had an interesting gimmick, but I didn't really enjoy it. I thought that it was Mongol's not really an interesting villain, and I've never liked him to begin with. So I can't really say anything else. I think it's certainly worth renting. If you have been following along with the Tomorrowverse, I would say this is worth checking out. The elements that this connects to, I really enjoyed. And I think the most positive thing I can say about Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 1, its long title day, is that after finishing it, I wanted to go back and watch the other ones. So when you're listening to this, I think this week I am going to go back and rewatch these and maybe pay more attention than I had in the past. That element, I think, is on me, but I'm looking forward to now seeing the building blocks that apparently were laid to eventually lead to this 3-part finale. So that will do it for my non-spoiler section of the review. I'm going to get into more specifics, which I think will help paint a better picture of why this is a good part 1 of the conclusion of the Tomorrowverse.
I am Harbinger.
This is the thing.
Yeah, I figured.
Now, this is probably going to sound hypocritical coming from me, but one of the elements I loved most about the Decamu was because it ran for 20 films. Some might say it was too long, but with having Justice League, Superman, Batman, and then other, I wouldn't even classify them as spin-offs, but spin-offs in the universe, it really got to flesh out the whole universe as a whole. Starting with Justice League Flashpoint Paradox, and then obviously rebooting to Justice League War, we got to see the evolution of this universe and the relationships really connect and evolve over time. And that is something that the Tomorrowverse, unfortunately, sort of did in reverse. And so we got elements of connecting things where we had a Flash film in Justice Society, Superman, Man of Tomorrow obviously being before that, and then a cameo of Flash and Green Arrow at the end of Batman Long Halloween. And these elements, the world was sort of being built behind the scenes. We didn't get to see it on camera or on screen in front of us. And an element that I was super happy with was the way that the story is structured for Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 1 is Barry is essentially on a time trip. So he is being constantly kicked backwards throughout his own timeline. And in doing so, it allows us to essentially experience his origin story, but also the origin story of the Justice League and what event ultimately led them to uniting as a team. I think that's a really great way to have the Flash as the focus. It's ironic to me how Justice League Flashpoint Paradox was just a Flash movie, and that this film, Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 1, is 1,000% Flash's movie. There are elements that I wasn't happy with, which was we see Wonder Woman on the satellite orbiting all the universes, and it establishes that she is the Earth 2 one, but that doesn't necessarily explain why she was the Earth 2 one brought into the War World. I'm looking this up as I'm talking about it because I don't think it's supposed to be the one from our universe. Now, I could be wrong about that, but I'm not. Again, I'll probably have better answers leading to Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 2, but it's setting up all these elements and getting to see the building blocks of the universe that we had seen already. I really appreciated. Not to mention that the element I was most not looking forward to was not ultimately the focus, which I was happy about, which is we get to go to Earth 3 where we get to experience the crime syndicate, which ironically was the focus antagonists of Crisis on 2 Earths, the prior film from the DC original animated movie line. And I liked where we get to see that perspective and Flash experiencing the multiverse, him being that character who can do that, being able to phase and I guess what would be vibrate his atoms and molecules at a way that he can move into the wavelength of those different universes. And also it being something that is a mainstay of the Flash, and that is his relationship with Iris West. That is his foundation. It is the backbone of why he is the Flash. If you were a longtime fan of the CW show, she is his lightning rod. And an element that I am thinking about leading into this, which is I'm assuming it's John Constantine who is constantly on the other planets or other universes and is sending Barry on all these time trips. And if you spoilers, if you watched Justice League Dark Apocalypse War, that ends with essentially Constantine sending Barry to rewrite the universe because the whole thing is completely gone to crap and they need to start over. Now, if that winds up being an element of this, I would slow clap for days that the fact that we did not think these universes were ever going to be connected, that they were. I really did enjoy getting to see characters who cameoed in previous films show up back in this. I even had to look up who they were being voiced again by. Lex Luthor, Zachary Quinto, Hal Jordan being voiced by Nolan North, who was the villain of Green Lantern Beware My Power. Alexandra Daddario showing back up as Lois Lane, I really enjoyed. And so the film, I think, as I stated, starts off slow, kind of building in what exactly is going on and teasing this fight with Amazo. But as the film goes along, seeing the framework for how the universe was started, how these different building blocks have led to where they are, and then even culminating in Old Barry, which, if you have read the comic, probably the biggest thing from the original comic book run was that Crisis on Infinite Earths ended with the death of Barry Allen. Not ended, but did result in the death of Barry Allen, and that we did in fact see Barry vibrating to a universe in War World, warning Batman about what was going on and about the beginning. And so I really like that. I think it is enough of a standalone with Barry being the focus that it works as a individual film, but obviously we know it lays the groundwork for what we are going to get in part 2 and part 3. Part 2 already teasing we are going to go to other multiverses. Again, ultimately for me, if you are doing this in animation, this is probably going to come off as rude, but there is no excuse for not having other DC universes, particularly the DC animated universe, which I would still argue is the complete blueprint for doing a shared universe at all. Fingers crossed that they were able to get Kevin Conroy to record something. We do know in the trailer for part 2 that that Terry McGinnis Batman Beyond is going to be present, but he is being presented in the art style of the Tomorrowverse. So I'm really hoping we get to see other universes, whether that results in Batman Brave and the Bold, or even The Batman would be really cool, or the new Superman show that's currently on. What is that even called? I can't remember right now. What is that cartoon called? My Adventures with Superman would be really cool to see. I know it would be, some people would say that it's ripping off Spider-Verse, but I really don't think that's the case at all, given how this comic came out in 1985. And yeah, I'm shocked to say that I really enjoyed this by the end of it, and I'm looking forward to, as I said in the non-spoilers, rewatching through all of these leading into part 2, which I don't think has a release date yet. I'm going to look that up real quick because I don't think it has been given yet, but part 2 will be coming out at some point this year, and I'm looking forward to watching it. I would recommend it if you are a fan of the DC universe in general. It's only 7 films to watch to see this universe as a whole, so it's probably worth checking out. I think they're all available on Max if you live in the United States. I don't know if they have a streaming home in Canada yet, but they're obviously available for digital rental if you are interested in that. That will do it for my Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 1 spoilers. I don't really know what's coming up next week, so I guess I'm going to let you know now. All right, first, it's the Spotify interactions. On the most recent episode, Echo and Monarch, A Legacy of Monsters. Scotty Cameron, I didn't actually put a question for this one because I put a poll instead, but his response was, great episode, enjoyed the Echo and Monarch reviews. I do agree that the Monsterverse movies need more compelling characters to make the conflict compelling. I agree. That was in the review. And the vote for Are You Looking Forward to Godzilla X Kong was no. all the way through. And I missed this, apologies. The question was, what classic film would you like to see get the musical treatment? Scotty Cameron, you're the best. I don't know off the top of my head, but I'll pick Citizen Kane or 2001: A Space Odyssey. Those certainly would be interesting. One of the avenues that these films do get the opportunity to do is adapt it to the stage and then back to the silver screen. So they're allowed the opportunity to do that, which it's kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't even come up with it. It's been a very, very long day. Workshop. That's the word I was looking for. You have the opportunity to workshop what works. I know Back to the Future currently has one in the West End in England. I have that soundtrack downloaded and I'm looking forward to listening to it. One thing I did want to mention is if you were following me on any of the social media platforms that allow video, so I guess TikTok, Instagram, or Threads, I did post my top 10 most anticipated films of 2024. I know I didn't do that yet in an episode. It just kind of slipped my mind. So if you do want to see those there, they are there. I was going to put that in this episode, but I don't really want to. I think next week what I'm going to do is I'm going to review Reacher Season 2. It just finished 3 days ago, so I think gives more an opportunity if you do want to watch that whole show before I review it, so you can listen to the full spoilers, because that is what it will be given the fact that it's a TV show. If something else comes up, I will post it on the social medias. Again, I'm on everything: Threads, Blue Sky, Hive, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all the things. You can follow me there. Please leave a review on your podcast listening platform. It helps the show grow, and we had a substantial amount of growth in 2023, and I hope to see the show continue to do that in 2024. My name is Kyle Naranya. I'm the Film Realist. I hope you enjoyed being one as well. I will see you next time.